Washington secured a commitment from one of the top defensive tackles in the transfer portal.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. We write for Inside the Huskies of Fan Nation Sports Illustrated. You can check out all our written work over there at si.com/college/Washington. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedon and use code LOCKEDON for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks is daily fantasy sports made easy. Lars, Washington, we've had a very busy Sunday. We're recording this a lot later than we normally do to give everybody a little peek behind the curtain as to why there was no live stream after BJ Green's commitment to Washington. But one of the best defensive tackles available in the transfer portal. He's going to make a huge addition to this team in 2024.
Yeah, I mean, I think the intriguing part about the addition of BJ Green is he a true edge, or are they going to line him up in multiple positions? Because that type of a game wrecker you can put in with his size. I believe, what is he, 6'1", 6'2",
6'1", 270.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a guy where, I mean, ideally you want a little bit bigger for an interior guy, but he's such a game wrecker in any position where you can move him around. And so I think it's a perfect fit for what Washington needed. I mean, we know we've been talking about they should look at some interior guys, Joey Slackman, BJ Green was kind of one that we slotted as an interior guy. He is an edge. So I'm curious more when Kalen DeBoer gets to talk about him on Wednesday, along with the rest of the signing class, where they see him fitting, because I think that to me is going to determine how if it goes from good to great, right? It's a good addition. Right. Good addition. Can it become great? Because I think it can.
So I like where your head's at with this, because I think that we're going to mainly see him along the interior. I think that he could take kind of that role of, like, it could be him and Voit Tanufi, him and Zach Durfee or something along the interior in some of those turbo packages where you just want speed from a pass rush perspective. Because let's be real here. I like BJ Green a lot. BJ Green was not brought to this team to be a 3-down defender and be a run stopper. That is not why he's here. That's not what he can do size-wise. That's not where he thrives. This guy had 56 pressures this year, which was the 6th most among all Power 5 defenders. This guy can get after the quarterback. And having that kind of skill, that kind of talent along the interior of the offensive line, of the defensive line, is just so vital, because that's something we've talked about on this show all season long, is where is the pressure going to come from on the interior? We still like Javon Parker. We think his twin brother Armon Parker could be a good pass rusher too, but we just haven't seen him on the field. Fatu Tuitela shows flashes of that at times. So this is that guy who can really just, like you said, wreck the game from the interior and can just do so much from pass rush perspective. I think we're mainly going to see him along the interior, but if you really just are going to need a boost, or he's going to factor in on the edge as well. There's no question about that.
Right, and I think that's the intriguing part about it, because when you think about what Washington has at the edge next season, what's the first name that comes to mind?
Zach Durfee.
That's a problem. I love Zach Durfee, right? But that's a problem, right? Yeah. If you, in terms of, you had Zion Tupuola-Fatui and Braylon Trice this year. You had Jeremiah Martin and Braylon Trice last year. Now you're going to, without BJ Green, right? You're going to Zach Durfee and Lance Holtzclaw, or Maurice Himes, right? So there's a lot. There's a lot of bodies there, but none that truly are like, hey, the Jabbar Muhammad, if you will, right? Hey, that's our guy, that's our lockdown, that's our Braylon Trice, that's our Jabbar, that's our Eddie, right? The one position where you can kind of figure out the other side when you have a guy like that. And I think that's kind of where I'm at with this edition. But I am intrigued, because I'm looking on PFF right now to see where he lined up for the most part, because that, I think, to me, because that's the other thing too. When you think about the Arizona State game, he didn't have any sacks against Washington, but he had 5 total pressures, was kind of a guy that you always seem to mention, even though he didn't record a sack or make a lot of stats. He was like we keep repeating, right? A game wrecker, right? That's really, especially when you're going into the Big Ten, facing a Penn State, facing, multitudes of teams that are going to be a little tougher challenges than what they face in the Pac-12 this year. You need that guy that you can rely on, not only on the outside, but then knowing that you can also put him on the inside as well. Because again, I think Voight-Sanufi is good, but and to your point, Fatu Tuitele, I believe, can come back, is what we're saying.
He can, yeah.
Right. So, but whether or not Fatu comes back, he's been good, but nowhere near BJ Green, right? And I think even Voight-Sanufi from a pass rush perspective has eclipsed Fatu. That's not to say that you don't want that kind of guy back, because he's still a big body to be a run stuffer and things like that. But they really needed to get that priority edge, and with the caveat here being you're bringing in a Noah Carter as a true freshman. You're bringing in a number of guys as true freshmen where, yeah, they probably will see game time next year, but you don't want to have that be, hey, we're going to build this guy up for the next 3 years. We're just going to throw him in there. He's our 4-star guy. It's like, okay, that's good, but that's what Steve Sarkisian used to do back in the day when he was at Washington, right? Where it's like, hey, we can't get a ton of guys, so the guys that we do get, we're just going to throw them right in. It's like, okay, I like the theory, but you'd rather have to build those guys in. And if they happen to beat every other veteran out, that's just a bonus.
No, absolutely. And that's something we see at Oregon a lot too, right? Where some of these high value recruits get thrown into the fire sometimes a little bit too soon. And it can really stunt their development from moving from high school to college. So I want to stick with the Jabbar Muhammad comparison that you made there, because I think that works really well on a couple of levels. The first one being that's exactly what this is, right? This is a high-level transfer brought in to a mainly inexperienced room saying, we want you to take some of these guys under your wing, teach them what you know, but we also need you to make a big impact for us right now. And then on top of that, Jabbar Muhammad was a top 10 overall rated transfer by Pro Football Focus last year. He was, I believe, the 9th rated player overall, second defender on the board. And BJ Green is currently ranked as the number 7 overall transfer prospect in this class by PFF. And of course, narrative. This is fitting the narrative, right? So this is great. But there are few players that when you just watch the film were more impactful on a snap-to-snap basis. This is a guy who, as a true freshman, led Arizona State in sacks. We saw him last year really get after Michael Penix in that game down in Tempe, the last game the Huskies lost. This year, again, we saw BJ Green, as you just said, was all over the field, just destroying that Husky offensive line. And now getting him on the other side, making this move to the Big Ten, this is massive.
Exactly. And I think so. As I speaking of fitting narratives here, so BJ Green played 675 total snaps along the defensive line just this season. D tackle, right D tackle, Leo. I mean, there's a number of positions. So I think to your point, where like a guy like Braylon Trice, right, where yes, we saw that Braylon could play a couple different positions, but it was more or less square peg in a round hole when he was there, mainly because he's an athletic freak who you can just put in those positions and just see if you can stunt and get something like that. BJ Green, it's natural for him to do this. So I think if you combine a Braylon Trice and a Zach Durfee potential, that's kind of what you have with BJ Green. And so not only do you have then those other bodies to kind of mix in with him, but man, I mean, if you to your point, it's like imagine if you're Washington, if you had gotten Liatu Latu as a transfer for 1 year, right? That sort of thing, right? It's like that is a instant impact. You're bringing him in almost like a quarterback on offense, where it's like you know exactly what you want to get and you know likely what you're going to get. That's why you bring these guys in.
Right. With just 1 year of eligibility remaining, this is just a give us all you got. We're going to give you as much as you can, give you a big stage to play on before you head off to the NFL. It really does work really, really well on both parts. And Lars, while he was the only commit we saw as we record this on Sunday night, the only commit we saw today, that isn't saying that there aren't going to be more to come in the future with early signing day on Wednesday. So we're going to just talk about all the rumors we're hearing, some guys that we like fit-wise and more here on Locked On Huskies. But we're going to get into some ads here real quick first. We're going to send a message to our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right, Lars, let's just jump right back into this here. So is there anybody that you think, I think there are a lot of different guys that we can talk about here, but is there anybody who visited this weekend, who maybe didn't visit this weekend, that's really standing out to you as, oh, this is a big mess, or this is somebody that the Huskies really need to get by Wednesday?
No, I mean, I don't think there's a big miss in the sense of, I'm going to address the elephant in the room. Jaquavius Marks did not visit Washington by all indications. That's not necessarily an indictment on the staff, because if you're Jaquavius Marks, right, there's plenty of ways to split this. Maybe Dylan Johnson's coming back, probably not, but maybe, right? Maybe they want to go for another 1-year guy somewhere else, and with the thought that Cam Davis, Will Nixon, and others can emerge next year, Daniel Ngata. So I don't necessarily want to label it as this is a big miss, right? This is massive, right?
Sure.
But I do think there is something still to be said for that position next year, right? You know, Cam Davis coming off an ACL.
I don't know if it's ever really specified.
Right, so a lower, some type of lower body injury. Right, lower body. I'm just going to be clear and cut. Lower body below the waist. But the point of it is, you don't know how guys will respond to that, right? I mean, all indications are Cam's been great, sticking in the playbook, diving in team meetings, all that stuff. Lee Mark said he's been a phenomenal teammate in that regard. But when it comes to on the field, we saw with Jalen McMillan this year, it takes guys a little bit of time to get going. And if you're Washington breaking in a new quarterback in Will Rogers and a new running back, like that to me, and a 3 new receivers, a couple new receivers at the very least, you know, that to me, I think that's part of where my pause for concern is. The other pause for, not concern, but pause in general, is how does the offensive line look? And to that point, Drew Azzopardi, San Diego State offensive lineman, took a visit to Washington this weekend. I do feel good about Washington's chances with him, but at the same point, there's still a lot of questions, like I said on a couple of shows earlier this week, where I said one of the main things that Ryan Grubb pointed out about why Fresno State's offense didn't look like Washington's is because they didn't have the offensive line. Right. Now that you're losing Troy Fatano, Roger, like potentially Roger Rosengarten, and you lost a few guys last year, can you continue that development and maintain that level of play along the offensive line in order for Rodgers and the offense to have success?
No, you're absolutely right. And so let's stick at running back for a second, because while Jaquavius Marks didn't visit this weekend, one guy who I think is a really intriguing prospect did, and that's Anthony Woods from Idaho. I think that he's a really, really intriguing just player. 811 yards, 3 touchdowns for the Vandals this past season. Named a freshman All-American by one of the lists that puts that out. And I think that he's somebody who, I don't know if who would necessarily be like a 1A in this kind of offense, like what Dylan Johnson was able to do this year, but he could definitely be a 1B or just a 2 behind Cam Davis and maybe a Will Nixon or a Daniel Ngata or whoever else would be part of this system next year. And outside of Marks, I feel like running back has been really tough to just find guys that, might have just been interested in entering the portal. We heard rumors about Damian Martinez entering the portal. That didn't happen. We heard rumors about Ashton Jeanty at Boise State entering the portal. That didn't happen. Jaden Odd at Cal. That didn't happen. So Washington was left to just kind of, I want to say, wait outside their comfort zone, even though it's very clear that Mississippi State is not that at this point, after getting Will Rogers and Dylan Johnson. But it feels like it got a little bit tougher after some of those other guys decided not to enter the portal. And I feel like you can say the same thing on the defensive side, where there've been some more questions that I just kind of want to dive into a little bit, because we can look at a guy like Triquez Bridges at Oregon. It sounds like he's down to either Washington or Florida as we record this, so he hasn't announced yet. It seems like it could go either way there. That's one to watch. It sounds like Kobe Savage, the Kansas State safety, who did take a visit this weekend, is going to end up at Oregon. But then the one that I'm really intrigued at watching in the defensive backfield right now is Kamari Ramsey, the former UCLA safety, where he's down to USC, Ohio State, and Washington. And it seems like it could really go either way. I wouldn't be surprised if USC wins out there since they just hired his former defensive coordinator at UCLA. But I think that that's one that would be really interesting because not only is it just a somewhat thin position in terms of the players that are available, which is why I wanted to compare it to running back a little bit, but this is Kamari Ramsey is somebody who would make a really big impact on this team too.
Yeah, I mean, I think much like we talked about needing an edge rusher when I asked you who's your top edge rusher coming back next season, it's a little bit better in the secondary, right? Because you do have Cameron Fabiculon and potentially Asa Turner. McKillis Dean's had some interceptions, but really beyond that, there ain't a lot of experience there. So I think what I would be curious, and this is kind of where I'm at with the whole secondary in general, if they miss on both Savage and the UCLA DB, Ramsey. If they miss on both of them, how many other guys in the portal between now and spring ball can you add? Because I think that there's always going to be. The Arkansas quarterback entered the portal like less than a week ago, like after most guys had made their decisions about where they're going to transfer. So the portal is ever evolving. At some point, you're going to probably find somebody in the portal, and maybe you end up taking a flyer. And I think with or without, probably maybe this is kind of leading into next segment a little bit. But Paul Mencke Jr., whether or not he signs with Washington on Wednesday, you need to add a veteran at that position.
No, I agree with you there. And that's kind of one of the reasons I'm really intrigued by Tre'Quez Bridges, who we saw him down at Oregon. He's a really talented player. He was actually like kind of passed over after starting in 2022 at corner, played really well that year, came back, got passed over by Jalil Florence, Nico Reed, Kyrie Jackson, just kind of pushed him into a little bit of a lesser role. And he's somebody who actually came out of high school as a safety and played a little bit of safety for them. And I think that's somebody who could play a little bit of either if he was asked. I really like his size at cornerback. If he were to commit, I think that would be a really just getting one of those big like Keith Taylor, Kevin King molds at cornerback would be just really nice to see because we haven't seen a guy like that in a while as part of this defense. But if the coaching staff says, no, we'd rather have you at safety, I feel like that would be a really good get there as well. And you're right. I know there's a later January period in the portal, and then of course after spring ball. So no matter what, it feels like they're going to find a way to get an experienced body there. The question just is who and how big of an impact can they make?
Right. Who and a when more so than anything else, right? The combination of that, because if you're taking Ramsey and you get Bridges, that's your home run, right? Because then you put Bridges at corner, Ramsey at safety, and yes, you can interchange them, right? I mean, I think similar with BJ Green, it's like defensively, I think it's pretty clear what they want, what Chuck Morrell and William Inge want. They want guys who are versatile. Cam Fab played multiple positions, Mish Powell played multiple positions, Jabbar Muhammad played multiple positions, but while being known as a cornerback, we saw him at safety plenty of times towards the end of the season. So I think it's a matter of get the talent on the roster and then just figure out how to best use them as you go forward, right? Because I think at this point for this coaching staff, I mean, let's be real, the defense improved. So the coaching staff has the ability to make improvements in that regard, but you have to have better players in order to do that.
No, absolutely. And I feel like another position where you can just kind of talk about it in that same light is tight end. This is something we talked about a little bit later last week where it still feels like the coaching staff wants to add a tight end. The question is just going to be, can they close on one of their top two targets? And these are guys we've talked about a little bit on the show, and that's Jack Belling at Oregon State and Ben Yurosek from Stanford. If they can get one of those two guys in the door, that would be such a huge just get for Will Rogers and for this passing offense as a whole, because not only can these guys block in the pass game and in the run game, but they're just big bodied targets who can be effective over the middle of the field. And that's one thing where if Washington does lose all three receivers, if Rome Odunze, Jalen McMillan, and Jalen Polk all do decide to go to the NFL draft, having an experienced guy like that over the middle of the field that impact can't be understated for this team.
And especially with how much Will Rogers is known for checking balls down, having having a tight end that can kind of be that Jack Westover security blanket in your 10 to 20 yard range. I think that is imperative in a ride and grab offense.
Absolutely. And that's something where you can see Josh Cuevas filling that role too, but you'd like to have another experienced body in there outside of just Quentin Moore. And then of course, Decker DeGraff, who's expected to sign on Wednesday, the 3-star recruit. So there, and then Ryan Otten, who has just not seen the field yet either, which is tough because I know he's dealt with some injuries and some other things. So that's really hard, but you have to talk about most of these guys from a standpoint of experience is necessary. And I know that it's a much more nuanced discussion with the transfer portal that we'll definitely have to have at some point on the show. But it's like, oh, well, how are these guys going to develop if you keep bringing in experienced bodies? And like from the standpoint of like a Ryan Otten, right? Where it's, oh, well, how is he ever going to see the field if Ben Urosic is going to come in and Jack Melling is going to come in, and you already brought in a Josh Cuevas who's taking his spot, where there's a fair debate to be had for that too. But in reality, if some of these guys just aren't necessarily popping on the practice field, the coaching staff knows that. The coaching staff needs to make sure that there's somebody there who they can rely on come next fall.
Right. And I mean, to bring it kind of full circle with the whole edge rusher conversation, the coaching staff has raved about Zach Derby, raved about Lance Holtzclaw, raved about Voight Sanufi. As much as I love the Otten family, as much as I love Ryan, Tim, Kate, obviously the situation with their mother was unfortunate and terrible. And so I, personally and off the field, he's gone through a lot. But I think to your point, if they're not even thinking about bringing these bodies in if they know that Ryan can get to that level. I think that's why you're kind of bringing in at least one every year. And I think to answer that question, if they bring in both Jack Vetting and Ben Urosic, that answers that question. If they bring in one of the two, they at least have faith in Ryan Otten and at least what he can potentially develop into.
No, I agree with you there. And then we're going to move to the high school side of things a little bit because we'll get into, there's one transfer prospect we didn't really get a chance to talk about, but we were kind of saving it for this to have a little bit more of a nuanced discussion, especially as it revolves around 4-star receiver Aaron Butler. But before we get there, we got a shout out to give. And we are going to send a nice shout out to our friends over at LinkedIn because, when we talk recruiting, we got to talk about the best recruiters on the market, because when you're hiring for your small business, you want to have as many top tier candidates as possible to interview. That's why you check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. Thankfully, with LinkedIn, the process is intuitive, quick, and easy. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockdowncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockdowncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Lars, let's move to the high school side, because there's recruiting. You and I were having a very spirited conversation right before we pressed record. We were like, all right, we kind of have to save this for the show, where one player that you and I both really like, that is really sought after in the portal right now, is Tulane wide receiver Chris Brazzell II. Really talented, 6'5", put up 700 plus yards and 5 touchdowns this year at Tulane. And it almost feels like there's a little bit of a debate right now on the coaching staff of if there's only one receiver spot that we can hand out right now. Do you hand that out to Chris Brazzell, or do you give it to Aaron Butler, who would potentially be, technically a flip from Colorado, even though he already decommitted? Which one would you give that to, and why?
So, with all due respect, be clear on that, because I respect every kid, I respect everybody's decision. But if I'm Jamarcus Shepard and I'm looking at Chris Brazzell II as a redshirt freshman, true freshman this year?
Yes, redshirt freshman.
Redshirt freshman, or a highly sought after, talented, unquestionably talented 4-star receiver coming out of high school who didn't finish the season. I'm not saying that's an indictment against him, but I'm just saying if you're taking both at the same time, like one or the other that you're going to have enroll early, you want the guy with experience, you want the guy who's a little bit bigger, and you want the guy who, at the worst, it's a safer bet, knowing that the relationship you have built with the Butler family and Aaron Butler in particular towards the end, and how they handled it, right? Because the staff didn't publicize it. It wasn't pretty well known that he was considering Washington up until really the last couple of weeks. And so the way that they've been able to handle that, the relationship is in place to where Aaron Butler can go sign with Arizona on Wednesday, play his freshman season for Jed Fish at Arizona. And then if things don't work out, or if Arizona doesn't have the same success that they had this year, and he decides, hey, I want to transfer, look at my options, you already have that relationship at Washington. And maybe the scholarship numbers are different, right? Maybe you have somebody else transfer out over the next year and then things like that. So I think if I'm Jamarcus Shepard, I'm taking Chris Brazzell II. And in my opinion, it's not that it's not close, but I just think for what Washington needs, had this been last year, I'm taking Butler. This year, I'm taking Brazzell.
So I agree with you, but I'm going to take the other side of this debate just for argument's sake.
Yeah.
So I think that it would be because getting Aaron Butler kind of, in a sense, puts to rest a narrative of what kind of level can the staff recruit at. Getting a top 100 player in the country like Aaron Butler is huge. Getting it at a position where Jamarcus Shepard was heralded as a fantastic recruiter. We've seen him do a fantastic job since he's gotten here. I don't want to give any other narrative besides that. But that just kind of adds to not only his pedigree, but the pedigree of the staff as a whole on that front, saying, can you go get top shelf high school kids? Yes, you can. Here you go. Like, boom, Aaron Butler right there, especially after we saw the flip of Caleb Presley on signing day last year. That was really helpful. Just, again, number one player in the state of Washington, 4-star corner, flipping him from Oregon. It all adds to a narrative there, right? And then on top of that, Chris Brazzell, let's say he blows up next season. Let's say he comes to Washington, puts up 1,300 yards, 6 touchdowns, has a Roma Dunze type season. He's leaving. He's going to the draft. That's all great. That's all awesome. But on the other side of that, let's say Aaron Butler comes in and is somewhat productive as a true freshman, burns his red shirt, say he gets 450 yards, 2 touchdowns, just numbers like that. That's really promising. And then the staff can say, all right, we have at least 2 more seasons of this guy because we're keeping him happy early on, probably not going to transfer that way. And, we can have a build chemistry with a guy like Austin Mack in the meantime as well, who, that guy's not going anywhere for a year or 2 after that too. So it's almost a building for the future versus a sustaining success right now, which you can also do with Aaron Butler in a certain sense.
On your Austin Mack point, don't tell Brock Heward that, but that's neither here nor there. No, you make a good point, right? And I think in terms of sustainability, but that, just to play devil's advocate to your counter argument, which is a good argument, if Brazzell goes next year, you don't think Butler would be like, hey,
sure.
I think so. I think that's kind of where my mind's at, to where, okay, that's a perfect scenario, honestly, for Washington, because then you still have Jeremy Bernard. You have Denzel Boston, who likely both of those guys come back if Brazzell pops, right? So then you have Tayshawn Lyons, you have Rashid Williams, you have Keith Reynolds. Now Giles Jackson's gone. So there's a lot of mixing and matching. And then again, I don't think it's possible. Could you take both if all 3 receivers go, or do you still have to? And because I think the answer is no, right? I think the answer has to be one or the other this year.
Yeah.
And then you could end up having both as Huskies in terms of if Brazzell pops goes after the 24 season and Butler transfers in. I mean, this is the new age of college football, so it's not out of the realm of possibility that now we're having this discussion in 2016. I can see more of a case for Butler because of to your point, 3 years at least, right? Yes. The caveat is also your point about Caleb Presley. How many games did he shoot for this year?
Sure. But that's also a different position where it can be a little bit more difficult. And then especially with some of the more veteran guys at that position, like, in fairness, like, let's say Aaron Butler was part of this 2023 class. How many games would he have suited for this season?
Every single one.
Sure, but how much playing time is he actually seeing behind those guys? Like, look at Denzel Boston. Yeah. Like, we saw Denzel Boston pop over again in fall camp. Barely saw the field to no fault of his own because the other guys were just that good.
Right, exactly. And again, this whole conversation that we're having is a great problem for Washington to have, because if you're choosing between now, because the issue is, if the question is, can Washington get one of these guys, is different than which one will Washington more likely than not choose to get. Those are two totally different conversations. One was happening under the previous coaching staffs, and now this one is, I mean, man, I still can't get over where this offense was 27 months ago.
It's wild to think about the difference. So before we get out of here, two real quick things. The first one, Dominic Kirks, who we talked about maybe taking a USC official visit. That didn't happen. Still seems like everything is in line for him to potentially sign with Washington come Wednesday. We haven't heard anything different. So we'll stick right here on Locked On Huskies. We'll keep you updated, and with us over on Inside the Huskies, we'll keep you updated if you hear anything there. And then Paul Mencke Jr., any updates and any insight on that? Because you've been our lead insider with the with his recruitment there.
I'll say this: Paul enjoyed his visit. I haven't directly spoken to him, but I just will tell you, Paul enjoyed his visit. But that said, there is something to be said for the education of Duke and sticking to your commitment and betting on the school versus the coach, right? That's not a knock on Washington, right? To be clear, but given how long he's been committed to Duke, if he can open any doors there, maybe he ends up sticking with that commitment. It would not surprise me to see Paul end up signing with Washington. I do think, if anything, it would come on Wednesday. It won't come before then. I could be wrong, but I would be very surprised given how methodical that Paul has been about this and very, very intentional. He's going to make a business decision one way or the other. And Washington has put themselves in as good a position as they could to get him. He has been adamant that he will sign on Wednesday, so I don't expect it to drag into January. So that's pretty much all I can offer there. I think it's 60-40, 70-30 Washington, but that easily could go Duke's way in the next 36 hours.
That's fair enough. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the everydayers tuning in. We do appreciate you sticking with us. It's been a really busy day. Lars was at the basketball game, and there's been so much transfer portal news. We just said, all right, we're going to save it all. We're going to do a massive show on Monday, so we really hope you enjoyed it. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. And if you're new to the channel, please make sure you subscribe wherever you get this podcast, whether it's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We are everywhere, updating this channel every single day with new content. So make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. Make sure you hit the like button. Leave us a 5-star review if you're audio only. Drop a comment down below. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, wherever for all of your updates just everywhere, every day. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on Tuesday.